What's happening, everybody? Welcome to this month's bonus video. Very nice to have you all here. Man, February really is a short month, huh? It's the same every year with me. I'm like, I've got heaps of time to make this video, and then it's like, wait, it's March on Saturday? Yeah. Nevertheless, here we are, and if we look at the poll, I believe we're witnessing a new repeat topic, a new every iteration of Wings, with that Beach Boys option coming in second once again. Look, I'm just going to keep that topic in future polls until it wins because I think it sounds like it would be a really fun topic, and clearly many of you do as well. Also, I want to talk about more Beach Boys stuff. I miss talking about the Beach Boys. But you know what? We still have a great topic to talk about. This month's clear winner was rock operas and concept albums. Tommy, The Wall, American Idiot. Now, I do enjoy the odd concept album from time to time. I think in many cases they can be born from really fascinating origins, such as Marvin Gaye in 1978, where as part of his divorce settlement with his first wife, Gaye agreed to give her the advance from his next album as well as the first large chunk of royalties, hence the title, Here My Dear. Of course, the album being about his marriage and the process of his divorce. I'm also a big fan of the 2002 album Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots by the Flaming Lips. In fact, I recently saw them in concert. Yeah, they played this entire album in full, and it was just spectacular. I love that album. I also enjoy Beyonce's Lemonade. I don't mind Murder of the Universe by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Magdalena Bay, who I'm about to see live at a festival in a couple of weeks, released a fantastic concept album, Imaginal Disc, last year, which I put in my pop music video. Heck, many believe the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to be one of the very first concept albums. However, I do have sympathy for those who debate this. I mean, I do think we have to ask ourselves how deep are we taking the term concept? Because outside of the Beatles deciding to take on different personas and opening and closing the album as the Lonely Hearts Club Band, how much further does this concept actually go? It's like that tweet by @RodeoMan that goes, I love that Sgt. Pepper is considered the first concept album, and the concept is we are a band and we are singing songs. I think the more conceptual album of 1967 is the one that didn't even get completed until 2004, which is Smile by Brian Wilson. A whimsical journey through the history of Americana and pop music with equal parts humor and psychedelia. It's really fantastic. I mean, obviously, if you haven't listened to Smile, what are you doing? I mean, yeah, to be honest, I could talk about concept albums all day, but I thought I'd challenge myself here and lean more into the specificity of the rock opera genre. Now, rock operas are a different story for me than concept albums, but hang on, first of all, what is a rock opera? Well, Wikipedia defines them as a collection of rock music songs with lyrics that relate to a common story. Rock operas are typically released as concept albums and are not scripted for acting, which distinguishes them from operas, although several have been adapted as rock musicals. So I've always appreciated rock operas as a concept, if you will. And as someone who loves musical theatre and also that intersection between music and film, you'd think I'd be more into them, but they've never really done all that much for me. So since this topic won in the poll, I have been consuming basically nothing but The Who's Tommy, Pink Floyd's The Wall, and Green Day's American Idiot. This includes all three albums, plus the films that correspond to these titles, with the exception of American Idiot, which was never adapted into a film, but instead a Broadway musical. Wanna be an American idiot. None of these albums are new to me, I've heard them all before, but it has been a while since I've listened to all three. Plus, I had never seen the film Tommy, and I still haven't seen a live performance of American Idiot, and that will probably remain the case. But before I get into my thoughts on these three rock operas, which I believe to be perhaps the big three entries of the genre, this is supported by the patron that suggested this topic, Jack_1479. I never know if that's how you want me to say your name. But they listed these three works with this suggestion, so kudos for that. But yeah, before I get into them, I thought I should go back to find the origin of the rock opera genre to provide some more historical context. Now, once again, according to Wikipedia, the origin of the concept album dates back to Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl Ballads album, and was then further popularized by Frank Sinatra's string of albums in the 40s and 50s, such as In the Wee Small Hours from 1955. I believe the concept for that is just sad guy in a bar. But the rock opera term didn't come into existence until 1967, where Mark Wirtz began developing a project called A Teenage Opera, which birthed a hit song that year, but the album didn't get released until 1996 and was only fully realized on stage in 2017. Then there's the album The Story of Simon Simopath, or Simopath, I'm actually not sure, from 1967 by British psychedelic band Nirvana, no relation to the one you're thinking of, which was described by Colin Fleming of The Atlantic as, quote, an early foray into the rock opera subgenre. But it is the album S.F. Sorrow by the band The Pretty Things that Neil Strauss of the New York Times claimed is, quote, generally acknowledged as the first rock opera. I gave a little listen to these albums, definitely not all the way through, but if you are interested, there is definitely enough there if you want to go down your own proto-rock opera rabbit hole. But really, it wasn't until Can you hear that? There's a dog barking. Is that annoying? I'm gonna go shut the door. But really, it wasn't until 1969 when rock band The Who released their fourth album called Tommy, which was the first to be billed as a rock opera and often cited by many as influenced by S.F. Sorrow, though Pete Townsend of The Who denies this. Townsend had actually been consuming much of the work of Indian spiritual leader Meher Baba and wanted to translate his ideas into music. His idea for the rock opera component was fleshed out about a year before in an interview with Rolling Stone, where he laid out the plot in about 11 pages worth of detail, which he later regretted doing as he was now somewhat obliged to see the project through just as he described it in said interview. The album revolves around the, quote, deaf, dumb and blind kid named Tommy, who grows up with misfortune relating to his parents and being sexually and physically abused as a youth before finding fame and a massive following when he discovers he can play pinball better than anyone else purely by feel and instinct. He eventually breaks free from his psychological block and becomes something of a cult leader of a holiday camp, but soon loses his followers as his teachings become more outlandish before retreating back into obscurity. It is kind of a bizarre story that only really half sticks in your brain as you listen, but mostly what I really appreciate about this album is things like Keith Moon's incredible drumming, which does a really great job of keeping the flow of the album moving. There's some great chords, some lovely harmonies, and just, some excellent tracks on this album, including both the overture and the underture. Amazing Journey into Sparks is one of the 1960s best psychedelic odysseys. Pinball Wizard is obviously iconic.
That deaf, dumb and flying kid sure plays a mean pinball.
Sally Simpson is pretty cool too.
But her mother said, never mind, your part is to be what you'll be.
Yeah, it's a pretty damn good listen, but not all of the songs really hit for me. And when I watched the film adaptation, the film, I actually began to enjoy some of these other tracks even less because of how dark and disturbing the sequences in the film are, like the insane Cousin Kevin. And the revolting Go to the Mirror. As fucking great as Anne-Margaret is in this film, I really had to just shut my eyes and pretend I was watching Bye Bye Birdie for a minute there.
Bye Bye Birdie!
Because, yuck. So yeah, the film, I'm kind of in two minds about it. Like, Ken Russell's direction is so over the top with all these close-ups and completely outlandish sequences, and you barely get a chance to catch your breath when you're watching it. But then I was thinking, is that what actually makes this film work? Or is it more to its detriment? I'm actually not sure. I mean, it's certainly not tame or lacking in imagination, but the visual element often feels just too much for me. I really like what Gary Arnold of the Washington Post said about the film. Quote, the music of the original album had a certain obscure dignity and integrity, and these qualities don't withstand the Russell treatment. On record, Tommy seemed a bit mysterious. On screen, it's just banal. I do, however, think the changes that it made from the story on the album versus the story on screen are better for a film. The story is tighter. But still, I just think my threshold of pure enjoyment for movies like this were at their height when I was in my early 20s. When I was discovering the Rocky Horror Picture Show and that kind of thing. But now I watch this kind of thing and I'm like, oh boy, this is just kind of exhausting. It reminded me a lot, actually, of the film that came out 3 years later, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which I discuss in my Beatles tribute films video. That film is no doubt inferior in every way to Tommy, but that distinctly mid-70s creepy and weird approach made me think that Tommy must have been a big influence on the making of the Sgt. Pepper movie. A big issue that I have with Tommy, which is the same issue that I have with our next entry, is how deeply austere and British it is. This might give you a hint that the next rock opera that I'm talking about is in fact Pink Floyd's The Wall. Both of these projects have a real grey, depressing quality to them. Look, I have no problems with British things in general, obviously, but there's just something about the way that these two films revel in their austerity that just, it doesn't draw me in all that much. Even the connecting feature of both of these stories being about a young man whose father is believed to have died in the Second World War and then has an utterly miserable upbringing is like, man, are you guys okay? Like the amount of mummy and daddy issues in both of these stories. Ay, ay, ay. I think if Pete Townsend and Roger Waters maybe were hugged a little tighter as children, these wouldn't have turned out the way they did. However, I find there to be a big difference between Tommy and The Wall. I think the Pink Floyd album from '79 is better in almost every way than The Who's 1969 album. The Wall's story is more narratively sound, the themes are more richly explored, and the songs, by nearly every metric, are stronger than that of Tommy's. And the great songs are truly excellent, like all three versions of Another Brick in the Wall, Goodbye Blue Sky, Is There Anybody Out There, Comfortably Numb, and The Show Must Go On. And even the tracks that I don't care for as much are still fairly strong and maintain a cohesiveness to the story. Okay, so backing up, how did Pink Floyd arrive at The Wall? Well, during the tour for their previous album, Animals, bassist and lyricist Roger Waters began to experience a severe distaste for the audiences he was playing for. They were rowdy and overexcited, with one show experiencing fireworks set off by people in the crowd. But it was at the Montreal show on July 6, 1977, where Waters was so irritated by these boisterous fans near the stage, so convinced that they weren't really listening to the music, that he leaned over the side and spat on one of them. Almost immediately after, he admitted to being shocked by his own behaviour, saying, quote, "I realised that what had once been a worthwhile and manageable exchange between us, the band, and them, the audience, had been utterly perverted by scale, corporate avarice, and ego. All that remained was an arrangement that was essentially sadomasochistic." That night, Waters confided in their producer, Bob Ezrin, and a psychiatrist friend of Ezrin's about the alienation and despair Waters was grappling with. He expressed his desire to isolate himself by erecting a wall across the stage, separating the band from the audience.
Goodbye.
This concept sparked an instant surge of inspiration, and that is how Roger Waters came up with the idea for The Wall. The plot itself tells the tale of Pink, a rock star who is sort of an amalgamation of Roger Waters and former member Syd Barrett, who becomes disillusioned with life and constructs a psychological wall of social isolation against his fans, his wife, and everything that makes him feel, basically. However, the wall inside himself only leads Pink to become more depressed, and at one point in a drugged hallucination, he sees himself as a fascist dictator at a neo-Nazi type rally. Men will literally become Hitler in their own mind instead of going to therapy. Then the film adaptation, which came out 3 years later in 1982, heightens the original album in almost every way, the visuals especially. You've got Another Brick in the Wall, which feels almost like the musical Oliver combined with George Orwell's 1984. The imagery in Nobody's Home is incredibly evocative, but it's the animation, for me, that really makes the film version of The Wall that much more elevated, more engrossing of an art piece than just the album. The psychedelic swirling and morphing of these images is at once intoxicating, horrifying, and breathtaking. It's honestly worth seeing just for these animated sequences, to be honest. And it's for these aforementioned reasons, and many more, that The Wall is often considered the quintessential concept album and rock opera. But it also signaled the beginning of the end for Pink Floyd as a band. But really, after this, where do you go from here? I mean, they'd been together for over a decade. Although this wasn't their last album, it was a spectacular finale to go out on. Oh, and just before I move on, if you're a fan of Dan Olsen's work on YouTube as Folding Ideas, you really need to check out his video breaking down the Nostalgia Critics' bizarre video on The Wall. It's It's good shit. Oh, and I should also mention that beyond the films, both Tommy and The Wall have received stage adaptations of sorts as well, with Tommy being turned into a musical produced by George Martin, which premiered on Broadway in 1993. And in 2017, the Pink Floyd album became Another Brick in the Wall, the opera, which opened in Montreal and was produced by the Cincinnati Opera. And in 2010, Roger Waters went on a world tour of The Wall live, performing the album in full with a massive stage production that my brother went to go and see, but I regrettably didn't. I was a big Dark Side of the Moon fan and hadn't gotten around to The Wall, so yeah, big regrets there. It can be seen as a live DVD though, which came out in 2015. But now let's move on to the modern take on the rock opera. Although I say modern, yet this is still something that came out more than 20 years ago at this point. I'm of course talking about Green Day's American Idiot. Alright, let's begin with a bit of context. So at the beginning of the 2000s, Green Day were in a bit of a funk. Their last album from the year 2000 signaled the biggest commercial slump in their entire career, and as they headed back into the studio in 2002 to record new material, they were tired, cranky, and had little in the way of new ideas. They'd reached massive success in the 1990s, but now that they were in their 30s, they were wondering what they had left to offer. Then the masters for this new material, which the band weren't really feeling that strongly about anyway, were stolen. However, this presented a new opportunity for the band to start fresh, and in doing so, Green Day experienced a kind of rebirth.
Right around 2003, I think as a band we really wanted to sort of have like a monumental moment.
Putting aside the classic power chords, the band were experimenting with polka music, salsa, and importantly, not sounding so belligerently angry 24/7. This is where Billy Joe Armstrong had the idea to make something bigger, his own Bohemian Rhapsody.
With American Idiot, we wanted to make some kind of concept record. We knew that.
Being a punk band, Green Day had always been vaguely political, but with American Idiot, their frustration with their country channeled a more potent attack.
Well, I think politically, American Idiot, like when we were writing it, it was trying to make sense out of like a big mess. And you're trying to find something to believe in.
With songs digging into class inequality, religious evangelists, and the ongoing war on terror. This was kind of radical in a way, as the top 40 in the year 2004 was severely apolitical otherwise. There had been protest-ish songs and country singers singing about being soldiers, but American Idiot was bold, it was in your face, and best of all, it actually had some great songs. Yeah, I had an excellent time re-listening to this album this week. Yeah, some absolutely stellar numbers on here. Obviously the title track with that legendary music video, you got Jesus of Suburbia, Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and of course the now heavily memed Wake Me Up When September Ends. The concept of the album is also fairly robust, at least in comparison to other rock operas. You've basically got this teenage slacker called Jesus of Suburbia, who's feeling disillusioned in his hometown, and so moves to the big city where he meets a girl, what's her name, and parties. He gets fucked up, which then provokes his girlfriend to leave him before the protagonist realizes the error of his ways and moves back. I mean, that's loosely the story. Like with any concept album, there's still parts that are up for interpretation. You may have interpreted it differently than I just did. And you know, as a teenage slacker myself, when this album came out, there was much to resonate with American Idiot. I remember really liking the singles and thinking that the music videos were really sick, but for whatever reason, I never actually bought the album. I was never gifted it. I probably would have loved it if I got it for Christmas or something, because it was back in that time when if someone gave you an album, that just became an album that you listened to a million times. But no one ever got me Green Day for some reason. Yeah, I guess I couldn't call myself a huge Green Day fan, although I've never actively disliked them. All in all, this is a great record and really did a lot to further the genre of punk rock in the 2000s, and I just know that a lot of artists today are quite influenced by American Idiot, namely Billie Eilish.
Look at the hair. Ugh.
And also the change in the way Green Day dressed on tour and in the videos had a real ripple effect in every Hot Topic and emo MySpace page for years and years ahead. Truly iconic. Now, American Idiot was never adapted into a film, but it still did receive a major adaptation on Broadway.
we've always thought that somehow there should be some sort of stage version because that's what we were thinking in our heads.
I unfortunately never got to see this. I mean, not a lot of people did. It was only out for about a year until it closed, but it still received fairly decent reviews. And very cool to see Billy Joe Armstrong himself going on to play the role of St. Jimmy for a few of the shows too. Like that's sick. Ultimately, I think this was a good direction for the project to go into.
If you're going to do a rock opera, you got to do it right.
Punk rock coming to Broadway was definitely an exciting way to shake up the New York theater scene, but the key issue here was the timing. The themes of the musical are so distinctly mid-2000s that transplanting them right into the middle of Obama's hopeful first term just didn't hit right, and it was probably one of the reasons why it didn't go on to have a lasting success. But still a very cool way for Green Day to evolve as a band, and they even kept up the concept album theme on their follow-up 21st Century Breakdown, where a couple of the songs are actually featured in the American Idiot Broadway show, so that's kind of cool too. Now to conclude. Has my feelings about rock operas shifted? Well, I certainly have found more value in these albums, these films, than I used to. Re-listening and re-watching has really made me appreciate the ambitious nature of these projects and the desire to create something bigger than the basic art form that they sprang from originally. And I'm sure there's also a lot more potential for additional engaging rock opera adaptations that, don't harken back to the Second World War and a miserable upbringing, but I've yet to see them. Does anyone here watching this video want to list their favorite rock opera adaptations that they think I might enjoy? Not concept albums, rock operas. I mean, if it's a famous musical like Jesus Christ Superstar or Hair, I'm most likely aware of it. Like I said, I'm a musical theater fan. But if there's an album that's been adapted into another form that someone wants to shout out, let us know in the comments to this Patreon post. But yeah, that's my little take on rock operas and concept albums. Now to discuss what's going on with my YouTube channel. Okay, so it's Wednesday, February 26th, and I would say I'm about 1/3 of the way through my Midas Man edit. I'm aiming for that to be out, at least on Patreon for you guys, by Friday of next week. So in just over a week's time or so. Then I'm going to dive straight into making my Complete Unknown video and hopefully also get that out before the end of March. I really don't want to spend too long in that video. Hopefully that'll be out somewhere in the last week of March. And then I know I said I wouldn't be doing anything else before Ringo, but Better Man has really crept up on me as a video I've been wanting to make, probably more than Midas Man, more than A Complete Unknown. Better Man was a film that I saw it and I was like, this is a biopic, a music biopic that I need to discuss. Like, I need to talk about this film. I promise it won't take too long. I don't want it to get to September and everyone's moved on from this film, because Better Man has just received its digital release and more people are seeing it online all around the world, and I want to kind of capitalize on that as much as I can. Oh, and also I keep this between you and me, but David Leaf, who is a Beach Boys author, he wrote one of the first major Beach Boys books in 1978 and has been kind of a close friend of Brian Wilson since, DM'd me on Instagram. He's got a new book coming out about Smile, Brian Wilson's Smile, and he's like, hey, do you want to interview me? And look, I've only ever done 2 interviews for my channel before, Denny Sywell from Wings and the Lemon Twigs. I imagine this would be a very small scale interview. I don't think many people would be that interested in me talking to an author of a Brian Wilson book. But I did say yes. I did say that I would read the book and that I would interview him. I just think if someone like that messages me out of the blue, I should say yes to something like that. I don't think that's something that I should knock back. So that is going to be another thing, but that won't be, the bulk of that work is me reading the book. The interview will be just a Zoom interview, and then it will probably just take a couple of days to edit that. So that won't be a big interruption, but that'll probably be happening sometime in April. Okay. So that's everything that I want to do outside of the Ringo video. Now, bar Paul McCartney releasing an album, or I don't know, God forbid, someone like Brian Wilson dying, I don't think I would make another video about anything else. I really, really don't. I really just want to make the... I keep saying make. I've made the Ringo video. I've shot it, I've written it. It's just sitting right there on a hard drive, and I'm just so ready to edit it. But yeah, I hope you can understand why I'm making these other videos before Ringo. They are more topical than the Ringo one. a complete unknown. I kind of want to release around the time of the Oscars. It'll be a few days after or a few weeks after. And Better Man, like I said, I don't want that to be blown out to where it's completely irrelevant. I want to capitalize on that. I'm sorry if that's annoying, but it's just kind of the best way to schedule these things. So I hope you're okay with that. Your support really does mean a lot. My pop music video I'm very happy with. I'm very proud of it. I was hoping it would get a few more views by this point in time, so I haven't had a big boost financially from YouTube from that video, but that's okay. That's not why I do this. But all that's to say is that your support on Patreon is really, really going a long way at the moment. So thank you so much for that. Your suggestions for videos have been great. You're wonderful. Thank you for pledging the amount that you pledge. And yeah, I've been rambling enough. That's that for now, and I never know how to end these. I'll just say goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.